to hold fast to dreams. For if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow.
James Mercer Langston Hughes was born in 1902 in Joplin, Missouri to mixed-race parents. They quickly divorced, leaving Langston to live with his grandmother for most of his childhood. At the age of 13, Hughes moved to Illinois to live with his mother. It was here where he began to write poetry. Eventually, the family moved out to Cleveland, Ohio, where Hughes attended high school. The summer after his high school graduation in 1921, Langston Hughes wrote his first major work, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. It was published in The Crisis, an African-American magazine overseen by W.E.B. Du Bois. When the poem reached the hands of Jessie Fawcett, a literary editor of The Crisis, she quickly reported the poem to Du Bois in amazement. Hughes formed a deep admiration for Du Bois after the poem's publication. 20 years later, Hughes would send a letter to Du Bois expressing his gratitude. Langston Hughes went on to Columbia University in 1922 to fulfill his father's wishes of becoming a mining engineer. Despite his father's ambitions, he dropped out his freshman year and began to work as an assistant cook, launderer, and busboy. Eventually, Hughes signed up to work on a boat that would sail around the world. As he sailed across Europe, he met two writers, Arne Bontemps and Carl van Vechten, who would become his lifelong friends. He lived in Paris for part of 1924, where he made a meager living as a doorman. Upon his desire to return home, Hughes had difficulty finding a ship to hire him for the journey back. He instead witnessed many white soldiers getting hired instead of him in spite of his desperation. This inspired his powerful poem, I Too, about the day that unequal treatment would end. In 1925, Vechten introduced Hughes's poetry to Alfred A. Knopf. Knopf would eventually publish Hughes's poetry collection, The Weary Blues, in 1926. He would encounter another notable poet later that very year. While working at the Washington, D.C. hotel, Hughes stood 3 of his poems beside the plate of Vachel Lindsay. Newspapers across the country later wrote that Lindsay had discovered the poetry of a prodigious young busboy. Overnight, Hughes became a national sensation.
That would bring us to the height of the Roaring Twenties, where Langston Hughes would see even more literary acclaim. In early 1926, Hughes began attending Lincoln University and earned the Witter-Binner Undergraduate Poetry Award. The very same year, he published The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, as a response to an article in The Nation that dismissed black art as folk art. In his essay, Hughes called for black people to express their individualism and embrace their racial identity. He made it clear that their existence was not dependent on pleasing other people, but instead expressing themselves without fear or shame. In his own words, "We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it does not matter. We know we are beautiful, and ugly too. The tom-tom cries and the tom-tom laughs. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, their displeasure doesn't matter either." This belief in the importance of pursuing art from a black perspective not only was the philosophical foundation of his own writing, but a key principle of the Harlem Renaissance. Hughes would defend this idea in the body of his work during the entirety of his career. As he received his degree in 1929, he helped launch a magazine called Fire. Fire was a collaboration between novelist Wallace Thurman, writer Zora Neale Hurston, artist Gwendolyn Bennett, and painter Aaron Douglas. They sought to encourage African American artists and tackle a wide range of topics completely uncensored. While the group only released one issue of Fire, this was just one of the many instances where Hughes sought to motivate black artists during the Harlem Renaissance. A key factor that made his contributions to the movement notable was the fact that Hughes did not differentiate his personal experiences from the experiences of Black America. He wanted to tell stories of his people that accurately portrayed their culture. He differed from other black poets because his poetry was directed to the people, specifically black people. He spread his message in a manner that was humorous but serious, and used themes that could be understood by virtually anyone. For these reasons, his work spread to a very large audience. In one of his most famous poems, Harlem, for Montage of a Dream Deferred, he explores the consciousness of the Black community in Harlem and their experience with racial injustice. He questions what is to happen if dreams of equality are continuously deferred. He suggests that one day society will have to reckon with this dream, or it will cause them continuous harm. The poem reads, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore, and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags, like a heavy load. Or does it explode?" He sought to create an accurate image of the lives of African Americans by portraying all aspects of the African American experience. Through harsh criticism, he showed both the good and the bad, the uplifting and the demoralizing. For his style and his artistic decisions, he was able to attract the largest audience possible. And it is in fact possible that during his life, he read his poetry to more people than any other American poet previously. Langston Hughes is known today as one of the central figures of the Harlem Renaissance because of his literary contributions and how he spread word of the movement long after it was over. In 1931, he embarked on a tour across the South to read his poetry. He had a fee of $50 for his touring. However, he lowered or waived the fee in neighborhoods that could afford it. His tour and his willingness to spread his work for free helped many more people become acquainted with the Harlem Renaissance. In his autobiography, The Big C, he provided a first-hand account of the Harlem Renaissance in a section entitled Black Renaissance. His descriptions of the time period and the goings-on would influence how the movement was understood and remembered. He even played a part in shifting the name of the era from Negro Renaissance to Harlem Renaissance, as his book was one of the first to use the later term.
Langston Hughes wrote until the end of his life, having published novels and poetry collections even months before his death. At the conclusion of his career, he had already published 16 volumes of poetry, 3 short story collections, novels, and translated and edited many other influential writers. A career that lasting a whopping 5 decades. The man really never stopped writing. He was also one of the earliest innovators of jazz poetry and used a vernacular, accessible style similar to that of the modernist movement. Langston Hughes died of complications with prostate cancer on May 22, 1967 in New York City. But as one of the leading voices in the Harlem Renaissance and one of the greatest artists of the time, Hughes still lives on today. We see his influence in many great speakers and artists, such as in Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "I Have a Dream," a speech children grow up analyzing in school, which emulates his poetry structure and is a major contribution of the civil rights movement, which the Harlem Renaissance influenced. Hughes earned many awards and honors in his lifetime. In his honor today, the City College of New York awards an annual Langston Hughes Medal to inspired African American writers. Langston Hughes is a major factor that influenced how we think of the Harlem Renaissance today and how we understand it. We get it from his descriptions of people in his poems and writing. Certainly, Langston Hughes is a beloved artist whose influence still reaches us today. He certainly emulates his poem, Advice. Folks, I'm telling you, birthing is hard and dying is mean, so get yourself a little loving in between. Thank you for watching.